Amazon set the tone this week at reInvent. They're not chasing the smartest model, they're trying to own the enterprise AI stack. Cheap, scalable Nova models, a Forge-built private foundation models, agent infrastructure, and new chips. It's a lot. AWS doubling down on distribution.
Google countered with Workspace Studio, which might be the most accessible agent builder yet. Anyone can create AI workflows using plain language directly inside Gmail, Docs, Sheets, and Calendar. This is workflow automation moving into the hands of every employee.
OpenAI, meanwhile, declared a code red. They paused other launches to focus entirely on improving ChatGPT as Gemini 3 puts real pressure on them. It's the first time OpenAI has shifted from expansion back to protecting the core.
And DeepSeek continues to shake up the market with open-weight frontier-class models that match GPT-5 tier systems at a fraction of the cost. The pricing alone forces enterprises to rethink their 2025 AI budgets.
Anthropic added a rare look under the hood, showing Claude is now involved in 60% of internal tasks, driving roughly 50% productivity gains across engineering, support, and policy teams.
And geothermal exploration gave us a perfect example of how custom AI models unlocking opportunities humans couldn't see, including a blind prediction that was later validated in the field.
Across all of it, the center of gravity is moving toward infrastructure, agents, and domain-tuned systems, the pieces that actually make AI deliver business value.
It's time for What the AI, all the AI news you need to know in 30 minutes or less.
Is Amazon quietly positioning itself to become the back-end infrastructure of enterprise AI? So let's start with AWS. They opened up with the reInvent conference this week with the barrage of new AI announcements that, taken together, signal Amazon's clearest strategy yet. You don't have to win the model beauty contest, but own the distribution layer underneath it. Amazon introduced Nova 2, a family of models, Light, Pro, Sonic for voice, and Omni for multimodal, that lean hard into cost effectiveness. They're not chasing the smartest model title, they're optimizing to run cheaply and reliably at scale. And by Amazon's benchmarks, they're competitive enough for most enterprise workloads.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing sort of development here from Amazon. I think one of the most important moves is Nova Forge, which basically lets enterprises blend their proprietary data with Amazon's own training data to spin up custom novella variants, which essentially gives companies like private, vertically tuned foundation models without having to build or retrain them from scratch. And so this is really seeing Amazon turn a massive training infrastructure into a product for businesses to use, which is pretty incredible.
Training infrastructure and data infrastructure, because so many of those businesses already have their data inside AWS. And now AWS is saying, hey, let's just use the data that's already here to make a model that'll be here. It'll be great.
Yeah.
On the agentic side, Amazon launched a Nova Act for building and orchestrating web-based agents and upgraded its agent core platform, producing 3 what they called frontier agents: Kiro, an autonomous coding agent; a security agent, you can guess, focused on threat detection and remediation and cybersecurity; and DevOps agent capable of running complex workloads autonomously for hours or even days.
And finally, AWS also debuted its next-gen Trainium 3 chip, which is faster, cheaper, and designed to make Amazon a serious contender in the race to own AI compute economics.
So Amazon's been lagging in the kind of model hype cycle, but it kind of misses the point. I think Amazon is not trying to win the crown of smartest model. They just want to be where you run them, where you have the data, and leverage the distribution advantage they already have through AWS. And interestingly, except for Google, they're the only people they can run models in their own data centers with their own chips, which is a pretty interesting thing with the Trainium. So they're pretty well positioned if you think AI is going to be an underlying infrastructure layer for enterprise technology and for developers to build on. Amazon seems like a pretty good bet. This is a good set of announcements for them.
I agree. It's sort of an amazing flex in all of the year we've had of this company trying to be better, smarter, faster, cheaper, all these things. And Amazon's like, I don't have to participate in any of that because I have such massive distribution, and now I can come in with all of these features that candidly might move the needle more than the incremental needle moving that we've seen from the better, faster, cheaper models that we're seeing from the other big companies. So this was pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think Amazon here leaning into, it's interesting that in the AI space, they seem to be playing the AWS card, not the Amazon card. Obviously, in e-commerce, they are the place you go to do e-commerce for consumers, and they've built a lot of advantage there. But in the enterprise space, they've got a huge distribution advantage through AWS, the existing customer base base, the data sources that they have inside. So they're leaning heavily into that enterprise side. And it seems like they're really well positioned to play a game similar to maybe what Anthropic is playing, but with a few more advantages, owning their own data centers, owning a lot of existing customers, owning a lot of data that customers have already placed in AWS. So I like their plan enterprise and kind of maybe giving up the we're going to have the smartest model come to our Amazon chatbot, Alexa, or whatever, and get it done. It seems like a good play for them.
It's true. It's funny. I think a lot of people don't really realize how much of the world actually runs on AWS. And as a funny anecdote about this, AWS, you may or may not know, I don't know if this affected you, but affected a lot of us. It went down for several hours.
One data center, US East 1,
That's right. Like, when was this? Like a month and a half ago, something like that.
something like that.
And as a get to know you icebreaker at a team onsite that I had after that, I asked a would you rather question of the team. Would you rather get the stomach flu or have AWS go down again? It was unanimous that everybody would take the stomach flu over that.
Because at least you can order DoorDash or Uber Eats or order your Starbucks to your house when US East 1 is up, and when it's down, you can't feel better. Nothing to deliver for you.
That's right. So it's pretty painful when AWS goes down. Well, let's transition from AWS to Google. Building custom AI agents for your workflow is getting easier thanks to Google's new Workplace Agent Studio. Google just launched Workspace Studio, and the idea is simple. Every employee can now create their own AI agent using natural language, no coding, no prompt engineering, no special tooling.
And these agents live directly inside Gmail, Docs, Sheets, Drive, Calendar. You describe what you want, build me an agent that prepares our weekly sales recap by pulling numbers from Sheets, summarizing account updates from Docs, email it to the team every Friday. And Workspace Studio just assembles the workflow automatically.
These aren't passive assistants. They literally take actions across the workspace. They can draft docs, they can update spreadsheets, they can schedule meetings, send emails, organize files, call external systems via connectors. Essentially, it turns Workspace into a platform where business processes become AI automated processes.
Kind of like what we were just talking about with Amazon. Google clearly leading into the advantage of having a place people are already going, the data already there, easy, relationships with these customers. So a nice distribution advantage. I will say when I played with these, the agents are pretty simplistic right now, kind of like simple automation on top of email or Docs or Sheets. But I always keep in mind, like, this is the worst they will ever be. They're only going to get better from here. And I think you can start to see really interesting use cases as you kind of combine data from multiple sources together. But a lot of this is like find the most important emails in my inbox. I had the examples and I went, okay, this feels like a thing Google could have just built as opposed to letting somebody define what that looks like. But you start to see what happens when you take autonomous agents operating on top of the data that you have that's personal to you. That gets really interesting.
They are simplistic, but I sort of love that because, to be honest with you, those simplistic tasks are often the ones that people sort of like forget to do, don't get around to, but then cause a lot of friction when somebody else like didn't get the report, it didn't get updated at the time they wanted it, they didn't get your weekly, recap, whatever it might have been. And like historically, those were these like annoying administrative tasks that took a bunch of time and didn't feel like they added as much value, but now they can be totally automated. And so for the people that do add value, they can extract the value. And I sort of love the simplicity of it for that reason.
Well, it is true. It's an easy on ramp too. You don't have to think too hard about how to make an agent work in multiple layers. This may be a great on ramp. And I'm sure once people start doing a simple email agent, they're going to go, well, what if the email could read the sheet and maybe data out of this data source? And, you'll start to understand how to build these over time. So as I said, I think this is the simplest it'll ever be, and it's a good on ramp. And there is, to be fair, a lot of value. I mean, a lot of what an executive assistant used to do, and people pay a lot of money for those, is now automatable here by your own preferences and specifications with just natural language. That's pretty cool.
That's right. And speaking of value, if you're getting value from what the AI, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who may be leveling up their AI game. It helps more than you think.
Now we got to go to another big tech company, another big AI company. Is OpenAI at risk of becoming the next Alta Vista instead of the next Google? I wrote the headline myself. No AI in that. I like that headline. For those who don't know Alta Vista, Google it. And I think that says all you need to know about that. But OpenAI hitting the panic button this week. CEO Sam Altman issued a code red internally telling teams to stop what they're doing and focus entirely on one thing, making ChatGPT better, faster, more reliable, more accurate, and more personal.
So why now? It's because Google is suddenly a real threat again. Gemini 3's latest release has outperformed ChatGPT across key benchmarks, math, reasoning, coding. And Google is seeing a surge in user growth. So for the first time in a while, OpenAI is moving to defense.
Yeah, practically speaking, the code red means that major launches, think ads, shopping agents, health agents, the company's new Pulse assistant, they're all being delayed, kind of put on the shelf and waiting. And staff are being shifted back onto core chat GPT work. And the teams are holding daily improvement calls to emphasize the need for rapid progress. This is like a pretty big shift, I think, in terms of how the company's been thinking.
For sure. And, one of the key weaknesses for OpenAI is that despite having, 800 million weekly users, which is sort of crazy,
Yeah.
they don't make any money. It's not profitable. And so their infrastructure costs are just like absolutely enormous. And so they have to keep raising money and maintain investor confidence. Whereas Google, on the other hand, is somewhat of a cash machine and they can fund their AI efforts entirely out of the cash flow from their existing business. So they have an edge sort of economically and now an edge in their model.
Yeah, and this is kind of the first time we've really seen OpenAI acknowledge like a model being better. I mean, Sam is pretty generous when he talks about other models, but really feeling like it's a threat to their position in the market. And you're right, the fact that Google can keep paying for this out of the profits of their very profitable advertising search businesses means they're not subject to the whims of investors. They can afford to invest in these things. And OpenAI's got a real challenge that they've got to maintain growth. They've got to show that they're continuing to win. Otherwise, if they lose investor confidence, that's where all the money comes from, and that could be a real challenge for them. So I'm not sure what this will mean practically in terms of what OpenAI is like, what's going to stop showing up, how long will this last? Who knows? But it was really interesting to see this shift. And the acknowledgement that, hey, we may not, chat. I put the Alta Vista reference in there because people forget that like Yahoo and Alta Vista were search before Google. And people, when Google entered search, they thought, this is like a solved problem. What are you doing? There's nothing new to do here. And it turns out that nobody remembers what Alta Vista was because I used it back in my college days before Google. I was a big Alta Vista fan, better than Yahoo, and you could debate. And they just kind of are gone, like Friendster and MySpace before them, but kind of were first to move, but did not end up accruing the advantages and winning in the space. And, it's easy to think ChatGPT will be synonymous with AI chatbot forever, but turns out maybe not. And so cautionary tale for the folks that were at OpenAI.
For sure. I think like this has been maybe a surprise because a lot of the stuff that you and I have been talking about is like, wow, it's amazing how much work OpenAI is doing on its product innovation and really figuring out how to bring the model to the product level and make it useful for people. But I think a lot of that was predicated on and it's the best model. So that's the model we want in the product. And so if they can't keep that edge and they're not the best model, then they have enormous disadvantages towards the people with the distribution and with all of the users. Cause like, ChatGPT might have 800 million weekly users, but how many people are using, Google Enterprise? A lot.
And Google. And just a note, the recent reports indicate that, those numbers are flatlining a little bit for ChatGPT. So growth is slowing, and the Gemini 3 really shot Google up. So their daily active users are growing. So not only is it, do we have the best model, but from a where are users going now, the tides have turned. And it looks like, at least in the recent months, ChatGPT growing more slowly in user adoption than Gemini. That can't feel good if you're Sam Altman and you've been betting on the best model and the fastest growth, and you don't have either of them right now. I understand why you call it code red.
That's right. And I think for users, as a practical fun tip I have, open up a Google slide, put in a table with some ugly random data and hit the little nano banana beautify my slide. It like Google's capabilities are pretty remarkable. I don't know if you've tried that, Jeff, but that was my hack of the week. I think it probably saved me about 5 hours.
I haven't done Google Slides recently, but I did use Nano Banana to edit an image. And, I took a person somebody photobombed and we took them out and they were like in the middle of a group and it edited, moved people over, fixed the back. I mean, just kind of like very difficult side Photoshop work. And it was flawless. And the models are getting really good. And yeah, so if you're sitting there with the advantages of costs, profits, distribution, existing user base, and data, enterprise data in your data center, like that's a lot of advantages. And it would be worrying if you can't, as OpenAI, match the models and the user growth. I would be worried too.
Agreed. All right. Well, hitting a recurring theme on this podcast, Chinese startup DeepSeek just released an open weight, inexpensive model that matches the performance of the latest models from OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic. DeepSeek, the Chinese AI lab that blindsided the industry with its R1 reasoning model earlier this year, just released V3.2 and V3.2 Special. And the numbers show that these models are not incremental upgrades. They are frontier class systems priced at a rounding error. compared to their US competitors.
Yeah, so here's the headline. V3.2 matches or nears GPT-5, Claude Sonnet 4.5, and Gemini 3 Pro across the hardest benchmarks, math, coding, and complex tool use. The Special variant, I love the naming there, actually beats them in several categories. It hit gold level performance in the 2025 International Math Olympiad and Informatics Olympiad, and even placed number 10 overall at the IOI, which is really an astonishing result for an AI system. So this isn't just a good model, it's competitive with the world-class models from all the US companies and world-class human performance in things like mathematical olympiads.
That's right. And also, it's shockingly cheap.
Shockingly.
Shockingly cheap. DeepSeek's V3.2 costs 28 cents per input token compared to $2 for Gemini 3, $1.25 for GPT-5.1, $3 for Claude Sonnet 4.5. And on the output side, V3 costs 42 cents per 1 million tokens compared to $12 for Gemini, $10 for GPT, and $15 for Claude. So this is a 5x to 30x cost advantage, depending on which model you're benchmarking against at the same performance tier.
Those are crazy numbers, right? And not only are they cheap if you let DeepSeek run it, but this is the part that should really be keeping OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic up at night. Both models, including the full 685 billion parameter weights, they ship under an MIT open source license. They're live on Hugging Face for anyone to download, fine tune, deploy on prem without paying even the 30x cheaper costs to have them hosted. So, like, super cheap to have them run in the data center and free to download and run on your own hardware if you run. That's pretty amazing. And we said it's a recurring theme, but it seems like every time somebody comes out with a world changing model, an open source, open weight, super cheap version of it comes out of a Chinese company like days or weeks later, and we're just continuing the trend.
Yeah, and remind me, like, why did they open source their model? Like, I feel like if the model is the competitive advantage, and we're talking about how OpenAI is all, under threat because their model is not the best, like, DeepSeek seems to be not at all concerned about that. Is it just because they're like, you can give us more data if you use it, and we're so cheap that, like, what's the game?
I don't know. I mean, they haven't really announced their game, but I think part of it is just this real focus from the Chinese government on having world-class technology internally and having the world leverage Chinese built AI, not being subject to Western built AI that has Western values and morals built into it. And of course, when you open source a model that's just as good as anything from a Western company, why would an enterprise developer not build on the super cheap, free open weight version? So I think they're just out there really. The Chinese are interestingly focused on China winning in the world as much as capturing the value, I think, at a societal level, and that's bled down to the company level, where these guys are producing things and releasing them free that really have tremendous value they could have captured, but instead they're going to hopefully, in their minds, put Chinese AI at the center of the emerging AI world.
It's true. I mean, the geopolitical angle here is big. And DeepSeek's earlier release, this year with R1 triggered a US policy conversation about chip export controls. V3.2 confirms this is not like a one-off, like R1 was not a one-off strategy. This is just like how they're going to do things. So the dynamics are really important for AI labs and also just for all enterprise pricing initiatives building, AI strategy in 2025 and beyond.
It is true. There's lots of debates about how we respond to the challenges, the competitive pressures from China. But this really shows you that they're going to keep down the path they've got. They want to be the infrastructure layer, the models underpinning AI developments around the world, particularly if you get outside of the US, Western Europe, that are relying on these models around the rest of the world, Southeast Asia, Africa. They really want to own that. And, the things we do to restrict access to AI technologies in our competitors will also mean they're not adopted in the other many, many parts of the world that aren't the United States and Western Europe. And that's a real risk for, I think, Western society, Western companies for sure over the next decades. And the Chinese are playing a pretty smart game here.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. Well, if you have an interesting AI story from your team, an interesting use case, drop us a line at email@whattheAIFM. Andy and I always love hearing what's actually going on and how people are using AI out in the wild. All right, we're going to move on to a story from Anthropic this week because you got to hit all the major players. We had a Google story, we had an OpenAI story. Now it's time for the Anthropic story. Anthropic just published one of the most detailed looks yet at how AI is reshaping productivity, inciting a cutting-edge AI lab. And what do they tell us? So Anthropic released an internal study this week on how its own teams are using Claude to change how work gets done. And the headline really is that AI is now embedded across the entire company, and it's not just speeding up tasks, it's restructuring them and changing which tasks get done.
That's right. So employees say that they now use Claude for 60% of their tasks and estimate a 50% productivity gain, roughly double the figures from about a year ago. Over a quarter of AI tasks were ones that wouldn't have happened otherwise otherwise. So dashboards, cleanup, and experiments that maybe just weren't worth the manual effort.
Yeah. So focusing on some specific teams now, engineers lean heavily on Claude for code reviews, architecture brainstorming, writing tests, and even generating scaffolding for new services. Importantly, they're not using it to replace coding per se. They're using it to get better code faster. Claude Code now chains up to 20 actions together before needing human input, up from 10 6 months ago. So another one of these things that seems to have roughly doubled in the last half year, letting engineers hand off not just simple tasks, but more complex workflows to Claude.
Yeah, and you mentioned engineers, but customer support also saw similar jumps. Anthropic says that AI augmented reps resolve issues a lot faster with more consistency because Claude can parse logs, draft responses, surface knowledge base content, all of that sort of instantly. And the legal and policy teams are using AI to synthesize regulation, map risk scenarios, generate structured briefs, which is really a preview of how knowledge work is going to shift, I think, in every industry and every job function. HR says it's using Claude to draft job descriptions, training materials, and even sort of compensation analysis, all with human oversight at the end.
Despite all this like seemingly great improvements that they've done, there were some interviewees who expressed, and I found this quote interesting, so I wanted to include it. One interview saying, quote, "It feels like I'm coming to work every day to put myself out of a job," which that does not, I think, feel so good to anybody. But I did love the descriptions of the tasks that were being done because I think it really points to how people are, much like your Save Myself 5 hours beautifying Google Slides, like all the work, the customer service rep, we're replacing them. Well, no, they don't. Now they can parse logs. They can look through all the data that they may need to. We've all been put on hold while somebody looks through a bunch of internal data sources, looks up the job aid, looks through all the whatever to figure out what's going on. And they're really saying Claude can do a lot of that for you now. So either making that job much easier and getting rid of all the work you don't want to. I mean, nobody wants to do that. Nobody likes downloading the CSV and doing 16 pivot tables to analyze the log data to figure out what went wrong. And now you're saying, oh, I can hand that part of the job off to Claude and get back to the part I actually enjoy.
Yeah, it's so interesting, this whole like dynamic of people being like, well, the AI is going to put me out of a job. It sort of assumes that the job you were doing was already perfect. And so if you automate it, then you don't have to do it anymore. And I just like haven't met a use case yet or a person yet where they're like, everything that I do in my job is flawless. There is no room for improvement. There is no room to do more. It sort of is I've had this similar debate on the fair lending side with regard to sort of credit models for a long time, where there was oftentimes this debate about like, should you trade off some sort of accuracy of the model in service of achieving some sort of, debiasing aspect? And I'm like, you would only do that if the model was already 100% accurate. And the whole thing about prediction models is they are not yet 100% accurate because there's so much more about the world we still need to learn. So like saying that you're going to trade one thing for the other is like running with ankle weights if your end goal is to get a perfect prediction model. And so anyway, this is just a similar type of thing where people are like, it's going to put me out of a job because apparently they think they could never have done their job better or something. It's just a weird dynamic.
Yeah, it is interesting that we often don't value, we value the thing we know so much. We're so afraid of change that we can't pick it up. But maybe a good way to start asking people about AI and how they think about using it is not, I've often used that. What if you had unlimited interns for free? But maybe it's like, what are the 10 things you least hate doing in your job? And how can we get AI to do those 10 things for you? And how much more time would you have for the 10 things you most like doing or are most value additive to your organization that you do? And what are the things that are least additive to your organization that you do? And how do we automate those parts of your job so you can do more of the parts that are value additive? I think it maybe is a good mental construct to think about, at least how I think the most effective teams now are leveraging AI to get more out of their day.
Yeah. I will say that for purposes of being true to the part of myself that is a deep skeptic, I will notice that the outputs of the wonders of Claude came from the people who are building Claude. So this study made me laugh because I'm like, I think there's probably a lot of social pressure in Anthropic to come out and say how wonderful Claude is.
That's fair. I do appreciate that Anthropic both looks at their own internal customer base. They've also done both looking at users and how the queries they do and the kinds of tasks and assigning them to jobs. And also they've done some new work that we'll probably talk about in an upcoming called Claude interview, where they've actually done AI-based interviews with users, not internally, on how so they're trying to be pretty open about the impacts and how people are leveraging these tools. And I think it's to be lauded because most of the companies are pretty try and keep this stuff pretty internal, and they're pretty open about it, which I appreciate.
That's right. Well, Jeff, you know what we haven't talked about in a while that I think we need to talk about?
What's that?
Geothermal energy. So let's go there. What can geothermal exploration teach us about the value of AI in unlocking hidden data? Geothermal energy, it's always had sort of like a fundamental, simple problem, which is that the energy is there, the heat is there. but finding it in a way that's like economically viable so that you know exactly where to drill is very challenging. It's slow, it's expensive, it's inefficient. So Zanskar, which is a startup, is flipping the equation by building custom AI models that can map geothermal potential across the US with a level of precision that used to require like years of field work and millions of dollars in exploration costs.
Yeah, I found the story really interesting. And like, instead of relying on traditional surveys, Zanskar trains models on nearly every scrap of geological data it can get its hands on, from seismic readings, magnetic surveys, gravity maps, oil and gas well logs, even obscure historical data sets scattered across state archives. The team then builds bespoke models for each region because the geology isn't one size fits all. And that customization isn't the whole game. Off the shelf models simply can't capture the local quirks, the faults, the fractures, the temperature gradients that determine whether heat is actually tappable. To your point, like we know it's there. It's just a question of where is it? Where can we drill to actually get to it economically and turn this into, a profitable enterprise?
That's right. And speaking of profitability, the payoff is pretty dramatic. So instead of years of field work, the AI can compress exploration into weeks and flag high potential geothermal zones that humans would probably never have identified or taken a really long time to identify. And this is not sort of a theoretical exercise. Zanskar actually made a blind prediction identifying a promising subsurface system in Utah with no prior geothermal activity. And when US geological survey teams validated it this year, the site turned out to be exactly what the model had predicted, which was a large drillable geothermal reservoir hiding in plain sight.
I debated putting this story in here this week. I'll be honest. It's a little off topic for our enterprise users, but I thought that this was a great example of a couple of things in AI and how I think companies are going to leverage it. One, taking what was huge amounts of data that were almost impractical to look at or see the patterns in and making them available, and then actually using that data to simplify and reduce the cost of a task. If you think we could do this thing if only we understood X, but if we don't, it's like super expensive. And so it's not necessarily simplistically applying AI to an existing workflow, but it's going, what could we do differently that would unlock a whole different way of approaching? And we have the data. We've just never been able to, practically speaking, leverage it. And I think there's a lot of businesses that are in that world of having a bunch of data or resources that they can't practically look at. You go, oh, well, if we had everybody read every filing, it reminded me of the scene from The Big Short where you're talking about Michael Burry and like the lawyers, they go, nobody reads what's in these documents. It's like even the lawyers don't read them. He goes, well, I read them all. And it's like nobody had the time to read what was in all of these mortgage-backed security documents. Somebody knew what all the mortgages were. He did. It was really valuable. And I think AI allows you to tap into actually reading all these things and making sense of the data and getting value from it. And I know geothermal energy is probably not what most of our listeners are super interested in or doing day to day, but I think that's a pattern that we will see repeat and be applicable in a lot of industries.
Yeah, but also everybody should be super interested in geothermal energy and energy broadly because I think like the reason I love this for our rundown this week is like there's so much hype out there about people being afraid of AI and it's going to take jobs and it's eventually going to like take robot humanoid form and then it's going to, wipe out humanity. And there's a lot of fear mongering about that, but this is a practical example of it's going to solve real world problems that have plagued us for a long time that we have not figured out how to solve, and on our current course and trajectory, we're centuries away from really solving, or at least decades. And it's going to hyperspeed, discovery and acceleration in some of our sort of core, most fundamental problems, which is awesome.
Yeah, I'm super excited for that. I loved, we didn't put in here, but also all the work on nuclear energy. So AI solving the energy problem that people think AI is creating, I think is a great my favorite kind of circular story versus the funding kind of circular story where you you fund the people who are buying your products. Well, I guess we'll end it this week on that note of optimism. AI solving really important problems in the world that have been left unsolved for many years. But as always, we'll be back next week with another episode of What the AI. Until next week, I will see you then, Annie.
See you then.
Ready to expand your AI knowledge? Want to become the go-to AI expert in your organization? Take the next step with Upstart's AI certification for financial services. This comprehensive course simplifies the fundamentals of artificial intelligence for financial services professionals. Both the course and this podcast are brought to you by Upstart, whose leading AI lending marketplace connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products, from personal loans to auto loans to home equity lines of credit. If you learned something useful this week, hit subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating on iTunes or Spotify. Your support can help others discover What the AI. And finally, share your biggest AI questions and insights with us at email@whattheai.fm. We really do read every message and we do our best to cover them all on the show.